So raise your hand if you already have a newsletter. Oh, okay. That's a yes and no. All right, who wants one? Okay, great. Y'all are in the right place. Thank you so much for coming. This is our panel on mastering newsletters, how to build, grow, and monetize your audience. I'm going to be your moderator, Leah Mallory. I'm going to save a more in-depth introduction for later, and so are our panelists. But just to let you know, these are folks with expertise and experience on crafting newsletters, marketing newsletters, and growing them. I'm just going to throw it to Red to lead you guys through fundamentals of newsletters.
What's going on, everybody? Some of y'all might not know what a newsletter is. Some of y'all might be a little familiar, but we're going to go through the fundamentals, the very basics. So first, what is a newsletter? A newsletter is like a newspaper, but through email. You can think of them like a digital newspaper that shows up on a doorstep, but in this case, it's an email inbox. So newsletters are direct channel content packages. They go directly to your users and they say exactly what you want them to say. They're also network builders. Your entire email list is your network. They might be friends, family, connections, people you work with. It might be your newsroom. That's your network, and your email list encompasses all of that, and you own that audience. So unlike social media where algorithms and the platforms themselves dictate what goes up, newsletters and email are your own. So if you post on Instagram or TikTok, it might feel like that's your content, but it's not. It's owned by the platforms. And so is the data, so is all the monetization and all that stuff, that's theirs. On an email newsletter, this is all your stuff. Email newsletters are hosted on hosts like Substack, Beehiiv, MailChimp, or if you have a personal domain, you can send them from there. And with newsletters, you can create anything. They can be roundups of your own life. They can be personal diaries. They can be photos. It can be really anything you want, including sales and something that you want to deliver to your audience. So some examples of newsletters are Morning Brew, which is a digest roundup of news, culture. You can get memes. Think of it like Twitter condensed into your email inbox every morning. This is one of the biggest newsletters, and it's one of the first that really blew up after the 2010s. And another example is NABJ's News and Views. So NABJ's News and Views is a little different because it keeps up with the community. It rounds up what's happening in the NABJ world. And it keeps you in contact with your network, like I was mentioning before. Another example is Culture Study, which is a big Substack newsletter that has a pretty committed following. This is a private writer who used to work at BuzzFeed. There are many examples like this where independent writers and media figures branched off from their legacy media companies to do their own thing, and they brought their fans with them. So why should you start a newsletter? First of all, like I mentioned, the direct access, you go direct to your audience. You say what you want to say. Your algorithms are not dictating your content. You build your connections. There's no better way to keep up with your network and to stay relevant than to have your name in somebody's inbox as frequently as you send a newsletter, and to have a subject line that keeps them interested in what you're doing. And you own your audience, and you can make money off of your content and off that audience. So some of the types, like I mentioned, are digest or curatorial newsletters, which just round up things on the internet, keep you abreast of what's going on. Another is a newsletter, which is just an update on what's going on in the world, or it could be a roundup of your stories. Let's say the things that didn't make it past the cutting room floor. You can just throw it into a newsletter, send it to your audience. There's commentary, which is just like your hot takes. It could be like a diary, something very public about yourself. And then there are community newsletters, which, similar to NABJ, just round up what's going on in a certain community. So the media technocratic industrial complex is rigged. It is rigged with algorithms and social media platforms, and it's specifically rigged against us. So the way that you beat the game is by owning your audience and making them hear what you want them to hear and writing your own truth and not being dictated by these parameters. So that's why I think these are so important. And I have here that your voice is your brand. So if people know you just by your writing, you have something very powerful there. So your list is your media equity. So those are the basic fundamentals of newsletters, and you'll see later on why you might want to start your own.
So now that we've heard the fundamentals, we're going to move into the Q&A portion. So I'm going to give the panelists a chance to briefly introduce themselves. So let's start with Red.
You hear me talking, you don't even know who I am. So my name is Red Young. I am the founder of Down to Earth, which is a health and wellness media company. So we started as just a newsletter, writing weekly newsletters about being healthy with your food, with your family, with weather, habits that keep you on your toes. And then I started branching into social media content, podcasts, creating things that involve a bigger picture. So Down to Earth is really just all about being consistent with your health. I write every week, Sunday morning at 6:00. Just try to be consistent in keeping people healthy. So that's what I'm doing now. There's a little more that we'll talk about later, but that's who I am.
Hey, y'all, I'm Gavin Godfrey. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I work for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. My actual specific role is I'm an editor for UATL, which is the AJC's Black Culture franchise. I'll explain more about that later, but in part of my role, I help curate and lead the Unapologetically ATL newsletter, which is what that U stands for. And it's just a collection of AJC's Black culture content, not just from our dedicated UATL team, but contributors and freelancers who pitch in and write Black culture stories throughout Atlanta. So I'm eager to rap about that with all of y'all.
Thank y'all for coming. I'm Paige Hopkins. I work at Axios. I'm on our social media team. But before that, I spent a few years contributing to 2 different of our local newsletters, Axios Charlotte's newsletter, and then I moved to DC where I wrote Axios DC. And I still contribute to a few different newsletters in the Axios ecosystem.
So as mentioned, I'm you guys' moderator for today, Leah Mallory. I'm a recent college grad from Fordham University in New York, and in about 2 weeks, I'm starting my first big girl job as a in New York, and I'm really excited about it.
Let's go.
Thank you. So the first question, just to kick it off, is how did you guys start working with newsletters? What drew you to it?
I told y'all about Morning Brew. I used to work at Morning Brew for a couple years. I started there when they were just a pretty small startup. They were just writing newsletters. Actually, at first, they were doing only one big newsletter. And then they realized that this is really working and people are reading this stuff. So they branched out into other newsletters and I got some work with that. And then I realized that I wanted to do the same thing. So I started my newsletter after that. But really the thinking behind getting my own newsletter is that, like I said, I wanted my own audience. Like I'm the type of person, I just don't want to be told what to do, just kind of in general. I do my own thing. So if an algorithm in a social media platform is like telling me what to do with my content, like I'm just not going to do that. So I realized that I can write whatever I want and I can still monetize and get paid from it. And that's a really good strategy for long-term building. Because people are not going to forget about you. That email list is not going anywhere. So it's like a sustainable long-term thing that surpasses trends. So it's a long-term sustainable strategy for building something big.
I'll say, I think I got to newsletters because I was burnt out from local TV news and went to a small digital media company in Charlotte, my hometown, that was really known for its social media coverage and really known for its newsletter. And so I think at that time, it wasn't necessarily I was drawn to newsletters, but I knew very specifically what I didn't want to do. And the work of writing a newsletter, especially a daily newsletter, can be a real grind, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the way we approached news and how we had our own audience that kind of had a daily habit of reading the things we were writing via email. So that's how I got there.
Yeah, like Paige, I wouldn't say I was necessarily drawn to newsletters, but I've always been a multi-platform kind of storyteller. So, of course, digital, print, video, photo, but then, of course, newsletters to me is another way to, showcase the work that we do, tell stories, and it also can connect with audiences in ways that, articles and all those other mediums can't. But I've always been a part of nonprofit newsrooms in the lead up to my AJC start. And so if you've been a part of a nonprofit newsroom, one of the biggest things you have is that newsletter, because that's how you get the word out. That's how you draw people in. That's how you get those subscribers and those donation dollars. So I really understood the importance of it. And then when I got to the AJC, our Black culture franchise, UATL, actually started as a newsletter. Now it's its own vertical. It's its own website. It's its own living, breathing thing. But it started with just a newsletter. And I'll get into that as well.
Right, so as you can see, we have a variety of creators up here, independent and those who work on behalf of larger organizations. So for Gavin and Paige, when you worked within your larger newsrooms, building newsletters, were you building upon something that was already there? Were you starting it from the ground up? What was that process like?
Yeah. I've had experience both ways. So when I was in Charlotte, the company was called Charlotte Agenda. We were acquired by Axios, so that's how I made my Axios journey. And when I joined there, we already had a newsletter. And so I was just figuring out a way to contribute and kind of work my way into what they were already doing, which I think is usually the easier way to do it. If it's already established and your readers have already I think it's really important with newsletters to have a daily habit. Like opening your email every morning should be just part of their morning routine. And in Charlotte, we had that. In DC, when I joined the Axios DC newsletter team, we did not, because we were just launching that product from the ground up. We had a leg up because Axios is pretty well known in DC, but we still had to differentiate ourselves from the national brand, kind of introduce ourselves as the local news outlet of choice for folks. And yeah, it's a lot of work, but it just takes time and consistency and, proving that you're worth people's time, I think, is the biggest thing.
Before I got to the AJC, I was an editor at Capital B, which is a Black-led nonprofit, and I was the Atlanta editor. And so I had to put together, develop, conceive the entire newsletter and write that every single week. And so that was a labor of love, of course. And then I got to the AJC, and the newsletter had already been established. I got to give a shout out to the names Nedra Roan, Naja Parker, Ernie Suggs, and Angel Brooks. Those are couple of NABJ members, some not. It's okay, we'll get to them. But they really put this together because they saw a gap in the readership at the AJC. Atlanta, as you know, is a very Black city, but that wasn't reflected in our readership. So they set out to kind of just let people know in plain terms, hey, the AJC covers the Black community, and here's how. They wanted to find a way to package all that content together. And so I luckily came in after that had been built and established. And now I just get to kind of lend my 2 cents as somebody who's touched newsletters a lot. Weirdly enough, I worked at MailChimp before for a couple of years in their editorial department, and I worked with small businesses, independent folks, trying to help them grow their newsletters as well. So, yeah.
And how did you guys differentiate, I can't say that word, your content from other newsrooms? How did you make it stand out or unique?
So I think it's again, because newsletters are such a grind. And so I think the balance there is lean into your beat, whatever it is you're best at. And then at Axios, we aren't afraid to aggregate. So it's maybe the top item in the newsletter is something that's your original reporting. And then the second item in the newsletter is there's a big story that a couple of outlets covered in different ways. And you're pulling, the most important things with credit, obviously, and telling your audience, hey, this is a great article that you could, click on, or this is the summary of the story. And so I think differentiating yourself, but also not being afraid to, lean on other reporting that's out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time with every single item in your newsletter.
Yeah, and for us, the UATL newsletter, I think what distinguishes it, even from its inception, it was what we call a really well-voiced newsletter. So the writing, the approach to it is very community forward. Everybody who writes or touches it kind of, like I like to say, writes the way we talk. And so it's very conversational. We're not talking at you. We're not just giving you the rundown of the latest news that happened that week. We're trying to give you a little bit of understanding about what went into that reporting a little bit, why this story we felt was important. And like Paige said, we also kind of nodded to other partners or outlets who did work in that similar vein to kind of showcase that, there are a lot of different folks out there trying to set a journalistic lens on Black communities. You just probably aren't hearing about them because of some of those things that Red mentioned.
Right, so you had a lane and a focus, a lens, you said. For Red, you who started independently, I know sometimes the hardest part when starting is trying to figure out what to focus on and what your niche is. So what recommendations do you have, and Paige and Gavin, feel free to add, what recommendations do you have for finding your focus and finding your niche?
So I think every writer can relate to not knowing what to write about, but the easiest advice is just write what's true and write what you know. And that's what I did starting to write about health and stuff like that. It's not what I ever wrote about. It's something that I kind of thought about maybe a little bit as just a healthy, active person, but I realized that I could write a lot about my journey and my story and my overcoming of these different little adversities in my life. And I'm like, this is pretty good storytelling. And people liked it a lot. I started to get creative with it, write short stories, fiction, include pictures. And then I started doing social media content about that was self-referential to the content itself, the writing content. And then I branched out into other branches of health. So community immersion, spirituality, a connection to a cause of your work. Like everything is kind of this larger matrix of health. And I also am a community organizer. I organize tenants in New York. So housing itself is a foundation of health. So I just found all these different connections in this nexus of health and was just like, I know people are enjoying this and I love helping people. So I think my goal with every newsletter is to just provide value and give something that people can take away. And when you do that, it's just kind of easy to be like, well, how can I envision what someone might be struggling with and how can my writing help serve them?
Yeah, I mean, I think Red covered it. Like, also finding what's missing as you're trying to figure out what to focus on. I mean, where are their holes? Like, where are there stories that you wish someone had written? Like, write those ones and put it in your newsletter. Obviously, like, newsletters are competing with, every email in an inbox, like from the discount at your favorite store to whatever else. So like, how can you differentiate and provide actual value? I think thinking about, where there are holes is a good way to start.
Yeah, I would literally say the same thing because I think, like I said, with UATL, that was how we started. We identified gaps in coverage at the AJC and around Atlanta. We wanted to show people that in a lot of ways, the journalists filling in those gaps. We just needed a platform to showcase them.
So then once we find our niche, how do we go about reaching or defining our ideal reader? Or how do we reach them? How do we find them? And how do we keep them engaged?
I tell people, never shy away from feedback. Be comfortable with what you know and what you don't know. Like Red said, he was able to tap into things he was passionate about and knew about, but there are things you might not necessarily know about and you want to grow that. So find those people, find those voices that can kind of fill in those gaps for you and just be comfortable with asking for feedback. You can't make a great newsletter. You can't make a great album with one person. There's always multiple people in the studio, right? So it takes a kind of community to build that. Identify yours, identify those people that you think can help you hit those targets, hit those goals, and never hesitate to reach out and ask them.
I mean, it kind of just goes back to finding where the gaps in coverage are. Like, who needs that? Who cares about these topics? A lot of times I feel like your newsletter audience will maybe have a similar profile to you, especially if you're an independent journalist or it's your own newsletter. I think identifying your audience and then like identifying what they need go hand in hand, because that's how you become something that's valuable and something that builds a habit with them. So yeah.
I love that analogy of the studio because it is so collaborative. Even if you're writing an independent newsletter, you're in this network of other writers who are independent. I mean, the independent media thing, like we all know that, like that's where it's going. And if you're online and really like plugged in, you'll be amongst the people who are doing the same thing. And it's not a competition. It's not a race. I think it's kind of like what we're tricked into thinking is like we have to compete and like be the number one ranked or whatever. But it's like you're with your people, especially if you're writing about something positive or creating value. You're amongst people who are trying to do a similar thing. You're all on the same path. And if you collaborate with those people, if you read their stuff, you'll be inspired, first of all. But second, you'll be like, this is my place. I know where I stand. And now I know what I'm trying to do. If you have a cause, that's great. If you have your individual purpose, your writing is going to flow. Your whole life is going to kind of fall into place. And I think if you let go of that competitive mindset and just find your collaborators, it just all makes sense.
So collaborating. And then what additional strategies helped you grow your newsletter audience? Did you guys leverage social media at all? Tell us a little bit more about those tactics.
Yeah. So, being a part of an organizational newsletter is helpful because I'm not the only person responsible for growing it. But is it not loud? Should I lean in? Yeah. All right, there we go. Sorry, y'all. Yeah. So I was saying, being a part of an organization, it's helpful in terms of growing the newsletter because I'm not the only one who's responsible for that. But we have done some unique things that have been successful. Like social media is a great tool for growing your newsletter. This is a very specific example, but if you have any kind of Instagram following, I've had big success with doing an Instagram story where you do a question box and you have people just type in their email directly. They don't have to click a link. They don't have to pay anything, like whatever. You just put your email in directly. It can be a little bit of a painstaking task to then put those emails into your sign up box or whatever. But it works. Like, tell people, sign up for my newsletter here this way, or have a giveaway. Those are really helpful too. I've done it. Like, and it doesn't have to be a big giveaway, like with a lot of money. It can be coffee with the author or whatever. Enter by putting your email in this Dropbox, and that's your entry. And then you've also signed up for the newsletter. So it's a little out there, but it's worked for me a few times.
Yeah, for the inception of the UATL newsletter, again, at the outset, they just were trying to create awareness, right? And so their initial strategy was called a low link strategy, which meant just that they had a main feature and they would put that entire story in the newsletter. So you didn't have to meet the paywall to read it. You saw it. And they had a couple other complimentary links. Again, they were free. If you're able to incentivize that in a major news organization, I definitely recommend it. And then, of course, what they also did was made it collaborative, right? So they had a Spotify playlist. They would take recommendations from folks, the readers, to ask what should be on said playlist. That's another thing I think will really help you, is never wait too late to start asking your audience to participate in the newsletter process. Whether that's giving feedback about it, whether that's like asking about things they want covered, or just general feedback. Like, one thing I love about the Axios Atlanta newsletter, Crystal Dixon, right back there. What's up, Crystal? And Thomas Wheatley, they add a lot of their personality into it. They're already great writers, but at the end of each newsletter, you'll see them say, like, what's going on with Crystal's plants this week? Or, where Thomas and his girlfriend going? Like, those little bits of personal nuggets help. And then we also try to do that as well with our UATL newsletters within our intro. We make it personal. Obviously, we're going to get to the news and all the meat on the bone, but we just want to say, what's up? How y'all doing? Never shy away from that. And now UATL moved into a paid tier, as we all have to kind of do in this news world, and that was in May. And so the game has changed a little bit more in that we are now driving people from our newsletter to kind of be paid members of what we're doing, but we incentivize that in a way that's like through our events. UATL, we have a lot of events around Atlanta that are Black culture focused, and we'll tell folks, hey, you're reading our newsletter right now. If you want to go check out this dope event, subscribe. Or, there's just different ways to try to get people to buy in, because I think a lot of times, how it is, times are hard. Money doesn't come easy. So if people want to put their money down, they want to know what they're going to get back in return, make that very clear. And you can do that, throughout a newsletter. So that was something that's been working for us so far. UATL, when it first started, I believe in the first week, they got 1,000 subscribers. In less than a year, it was 5,000. And now that newsletter goes out to 31,000 people. And so I think a lot of that just happens to be really built on interacting and that spirit of collaboration, not just with the newsroom, but with our readers as well.
That made me think of one additional point, which is like our Axios newsletters. Often the writers will encourage people to reply to the email for tips, for just general ideas, for pictures of your dog, like whatever. And I think that really helps, like, collaboration, to what you said, kind of build a rapport. I kind of see newsletters as like the new local TV news, in that, like, a lot of people feel connected to their local anchors. Like, you feel like you know them even if you don't, right? And so when you show personality through your newsletter, people feel like they know you. And I think that helps build growth when they're used to replying to giving you ideas, and they might get used to forwarding it to a friend, and then you've just gotten a new subscriber. So I think that interactiveness and that being personal is really helpful for growth as well.
So there's so many different strategies for growth, and it depends on what your goals are. So for my newsletter, I want people who are engaged, and I want people who are actually about it and who are trying to do better for themselves and for others. So the way that I get the subscribers that I want, the way I identify them, is by being authentically myself in person, in social media. I have a pretty decent following on different platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. So if people don't know about my newsletter, but they know me and my content, they're gonna be curious about me. And that's how I get actual engaged people, because they're already interested before I sell them something. So the other growth strategies that are important, like giveaways, creative ways to engage people who you don't really know or don't really know you, those are really important too. And the way you can do that is email referrals. You can get other emails and other newsletters that are within your realm to recommend you. Word of mouth is huge, because it's a lot about trust. If somebody trusts a friend and that friend recommends a newsletter, they're super likely to read it and even more likely to subscribe. And then your network of these similar like minds connects. And that's super important. In terms of leveraging social media, in terms of like just put your email in there, like with this text box, you got to give them an incentive. So it could be like a coffee. It could be you get a free subscription if you refer 5 people. It could be if you refer 5 people, you get a mug, a sticker, t-shirt, whatever it is. That's how Morning Brew really got big. They built this incredible software that referred people on a large scale with prizes, events, these like inner circles of communities and whatnot. So there's so many creative ways to do it, but it depends on what you want. Are you aiming for numbers? Are you aiming for engagement? Are you aiming for like a purpose? There's different strategies to go about it, but they all are pretty important.
All right, let's talk money, okay? So you all have experience with monetization and creating monetized content. What's worked and what hasn't? Who wants to start?
It's tough. Well, I will say, if in organizations that have newsletters, there will often be a divide between the people who are making money and the people who are writing the newsletter. But I can say what's worked is like packaging things. So oftentimes we'll have a newsletter sponsor for that week. Or sometimes there are options where it's like you haven't necessarily sponsored a week of newsletters, but you've sponsored like a series. Like our local teams do a lot of lifestyle coverage. So like a road trip series. These stories are sponsored by Lowe's, and Lowe's sponsors the newsletter where the story runs. And Lowe's sponsors the Instagram post that corresponds with that story. So I feel like giving options that way. I feel like the independent journalist sponsorship is your lane. So.
Yeah, so monetizing your content is one thing, and then branded content is a little bit different. A lot of companies do branded content now. Branded content is just like, let's say HSBC reaches out and they're like, we have this product or this promotion going on. We want you to create this exact content, word for word, as we say, and we'll pay you X amount for that. That's one route. You can get paid like that if you got to pay bills or whatever, but getting sponsorships and brand deals with your content, it really should be on your terms because your integrity is at stake here. The brands that you partner with, the individuals that you're promoting, that's all so important, especially as journalists. I mean, we know this, but if you're trying to balance making money with keeping your integrity, you have to know what your mission is as a newsletter. What are you writing about? What are you writing for? Who are you writing for? And how can that brand honestly fit into it? So an example that I actually wrote an entire newsletter about and created some content about is how I got sponsored by Nike for my newsletter. And it's kind of like totally counter to some of the things that I believe in. I mean, this is a multinational corporation that dictates a lot of negative behaviors. Let's keep it at that. But at the same time, they are very in line with some of the motivational, some of the health aspects of the things that I write about. So I negotiated something that was like, well, I'm going to write about the things that y'all do, not in necessarily like a hit piece, and not even necessarily so critical, just kind of like the reality of what these corporations are doing. But at the same time, like the reality of like, well, this is kind of happening everywhere. And if you're buying Nike sneakers, but don't have an iPhone or something like that doesn't make you some sort of hero or whatever. So I wrote about it from that perspective, and they were totally fine with it. They were like, well, this is honest content. We reached out to you because we know what you write about. Some brands just reach out because they look at how many followers you have. And that's fine too if they align, but really what you want is alignment and synergy with these brands. And sometimes it's tough to be so choosy about it because you got to pay bills. But I think really if you establish your voice, your mission, brands will respect that. And then further than that, if you want to build these relationships up, you got to know the people who are behind these teams. It's individuals. It's not like, like Mr. Nike's coming out of nowhere to offer you something. It's like there's teams that do this. So if you know the individuals there, you can negotiate in that way. Just be honest and be human. So I really think it's about keeping your integrity, and then everything will fall into place. Like not being hasty and definitely not selling out. Like there's a lot of value in keeping it real.
So you were just discussing branded content.
Yeah.
So then when you're making money off of your own content, let's see what I had here. Is there typically like a required subscriber count that you need before making money on the newsletter? Like, when did you realize you could start generating like an income or revenue from it?
So like I said, if you have relationships with people who are behind these companies, it could be a small business. It could be somebody who does like, I don't know, like somatic therapy in your neighborhood, and they have like 10 clients, but they want to sponsor you. You can work with them. It can be Nike, like I said. This week I'm working with Athletic Greens. Like, I reached out to them a while ago when I was much smaller, and now they're kind of like, oh, we see what you're doing, or, you know, they kept tabs or something like that. However it worked. It's just about staying relevant and then keeping it real, like I said. What was the second part of the question?
When did you realize it?
Oh, no, the subscriber count. So subscriber count matters, of course. Like, the bigger you are, of course, you're going to get some bigger deals. But with newsletters, what really matters is your engagement rate and your click-through rate. So we'll talk a little bit more about those metrics later. But if you have an engaged audience and they spend money, but you know, you only have like, let's say 1,000 subscribers, but out of those 1,000 subscribers, 100 of them are like active clicking readers and they're also buyers. These brands are going to want to go straight to you. They're not going to go to this giant newsletter where people kind of like barely open it. They're going to come to you. So it really doesn't necessarily matter about how big it is. It's about how engaged your readers are and how much they really feel what you're saying and how much they trust you.
Glad you mentioned like click-through rates and everything like that, analytics. So when it comes to those like click-through rate and readership, how closely are you guys monitoring those? And do you give them a lot of weight when it comes to crafting your newsletter? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, excuse me. We work with our newsletter editor a lot. That's another good thing about being at an organization. We have a newsletters team, and that editor, every week, he gives us a breakdown of open rates, click-through rates. He also breaks it down what were the most clicked stories within our newsletter. So that is something I wouldn't say we obsess over. I do, because as an editor, it informs me about what's resonating and what isn't. It can lead to surprises. There might be a story that you don't think folks might have thought about, but you learn that, okay, everybody's clicking on this at this rate. And we'll break it down to like, this story got 120 clicks or 200 clicks. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that's pretty significant in the newsletter scheme of things. And so we don't necessarily obsess over it, because again, right now, what we want is for folks to click those links and go to uatl.com. That's a plug again, to check us out, because we're still building and growing that. But I would be remiss to say it's not something that we don't obviously get a recap of and pay attention to, because I think it only makes us work smarter going forward. But I don't think it should necessarily dictate who you are and what you're trying to do with your newsletter.
The question is, how much weight do you give to analytics within a newsroom, essentially? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Honestly, I give more weight to emails. So people will send us an email and say, hey, I really like the intro, or are there any more stories about, this, the new president of Morehouse or Spelman, that kind of thing. And so I weight that a lot more, because that means that people are actually reading it. They've clicked through to that article and they've engaged with that article, and then they even took the next step to reach out to us. That tells me a lot more, obviously. But again, the numbers are there, and I appreciate the work behind the team who brings those to us. But that's always the challenge. It's like how to make sense of those numbers. To your point, like, we're journalists, we're always skeptical. So the numbers aren't necessarily the word, but we can use them to help us try to work smarter and not harder. Yeah.
Just one more thing about monetization. So something that's a next step after newsletters is that if you have an audience that's super engaged, that knows what you're about, now you can take them to the next stage with other content or with other products, other events. That's what I'm getting into now, is events, memberships, communities, products, whether it's coaching, courses, memberships. If they trust your stuff already, now they're willing to go to the next level with you. And now that you have this little base, you can get creative with the things that you want to sell to them. And it could literally be like merch. It could be anything. And because they know you, they trust everything that you're about. And that's how you can make real money, because now you got clients.
I had one more note on analytics. I know we're jumping around, but I think don't obsess over it. But if you're starting a newsletter, I think that maybe is the time to put a lot of focus on your open rate and look at like your subject line. The subject line that I had an emoji in, that had a higher open rate, or the subject line that was really long, that had a lower open rate. And I think as you're cultivating your audience, it is important to look really closely at that and figure out what they're engaging with and what they're not. And also remembering, like, if you're in an organizational structure, the headline on the website or the headline on X, that might not be the headline that works best in the newsletter format. So I think really experimenting with it and figuring out what your audience responds to is super helpful at the beginning. And then you can kind of, lean off it a little bit. But as you're starting, I would look really closely and figure out the differences between the higher open rates and the lower ones.
I just don't stop creating and thinking. Like, my mind is literally always creating something. So that's really not a problem. I get inspiration from literally anything. People walking around. I live in Manhattan, so you just walk around, you see something crazy. You see something inspiring. I always have something. I write in my notes. I go on Substack or Reddit and just like read something and I'm curious about it. You gotta be curious. You gotta have an insatiable hunger for life. And for me, it's helping people. So since I love helping people, I know that I can always create something of value, and inspiration just kind of comes easy. I think reading fiction is also a really great way to get inspired. And then it depends on what you're writing on, but get a notebook, like a paper and pen, and like just dump, and you'll get stuff.
I was just going to say quickly, I think your cadence doesn't have to be daily. I think it's important to remember that. Like, just tell people what it is, like once a week, once every other week. You don't want to be in a situation where you have to fill space because it's, not going to be useful to people. So it's like, if you only have a great idea that's worthy of a newsletter twice a month, then send out your newsletter twice a month.
Just real quick. So there is a standard that universally works. It's less than 40 characters. Sometimes it's like 36 characters that works for open rates on your subject line. There's been a ton of like analytics on that. Anything longer than that, sometimes it gets clipped by Gmail. You do want to keep it short, but 36 to 40 characters seems to be about the sweet spot.
Yes, use the emoji. I think, like, visually think about what it's going to look like when someone's scrolling on their phone, not scrolling on their computer, because most people read it on their phone. And the emoji does like break up a bunch of text. Like if you just open your email now. So I do think it's helpful. I do think it's fine, regardless of how serious and like capital J journalism your organization is, to still use an emoji, an appropriate one. And keeping it short is also critical. Also, if you have a newsletter with like multiple different items, if it's not all about one topic, the subject line doesn't have to be in reference to the first item in the newsletter. That might not be the most exciting or snappy thing. It could be about the fifth thing in the newsletter, and that incentivizes people to scroll down to the bottom.
Yeah, I can tell you, it drives me nuts if I have to scroll through a newsletter and I can't read the subject line because it's too long. I immediately I keep it moving. But to what my colleagues are saying, like, keep it short. I think a lot of newsroom organizations understand that a newsletter is a platform that a lot of them are either hip to or slow to. And so I feel like what I've seen, they've been willing to kind of play by those newsletter rules, which includes an emoji, which includes different elements that might not be in your traditional news medium. So if you're allowed to have fun with it, go with it. If you can A/B test on whatever platform you're doing, try an emoji on one headline, try it on not, see what happens, and go from there. But definitely don't hold back unless there is some hard and fast rule from the top to do so.
My company is very much about short and brief. So I would say keeping things shorter is generally better. If you can do around the 500 words, that's great. Maybe do you have strong feelings about that?
Yeah.
Long.
I feel like if you do 1,000 or less, you're good. But people are gonna read 500 almost like through and through. 1,000 is just kind of. Maybe that's just me. I just like writing a lot.
There's tension.
Yeah, it's very different depending on where you're at.
I mean, our newsletter intro, we try to keep like 300 words or less. And then from there, it's literally just links, a headline for each story. We keep it very brief because we find that, as you know, with articles, if you look at Chartbeat or what have you, most people don't scroll all the way down. Most people make it like halfway through. The shorter it is, Axios always, I feel like, has a good leg up because the way they format their stuff is so easily digestible. And we, on our UATL newsletter, do the same. We don't do that kind of low link vibe anymore. We put a full article in there. It's just like, here's a few hundred words, here's all the main bars. But yeah, that's it. Brevity is usually the key for newsrooms.
And I would say just one more thing on that, regardless of the length, at least break it up. Like put a picture, put some more emojis or something, you know, give me a link, give me something. So even if it is all one, you know, 1,000 words on one thing, so it feels like I'm experiencing more than a wall of text. I mean, I think a lot of news-oriented newsletters have similar formats. Like you start with a greeting, you know, a brief overview of what we're about to talk about, and then you kind of dive into the various segments of your article with the links. I think, you know, we've hit it. Like pictures is important to break it up. I think links are important to break it up, and like also just, you know, space breaks. Like give me some paragraphs. Like think about a little bit of blank space is helpful for giving your eye a break. I can't speak as much to the different like host sites for sending them out, but
I mean, yeah, I agree. I think it's the more you can break it up, and again, not all text, video, photo. You know, one thing we also do, we provide a utility. We call it the lineup, which is just a list of events, Black culture events that are happening in Atlanta every week. And so people kind of have that rhythm to it, right? They know there's the intro, here's our top stories, here's our trending stories, and now here's 5 events you can check out. And each one has a different look. And we build right now, we send our newsletter through Iterable, but we use Arc. That's our CMS platform for like all the articles and everything we do on our site. And we actually build it through that now, thank God, because I've heard nightmares about Iterable. Luckily, I didn't have to touch that. But MailChimp has those templates as well. And I think, you know, go with what really represents what your newsletter and what you want to do with those as well. And I think those sections are so crucial, because I think people's brains start to get programmed for them. You know what I mean? They expect them. And so, yeah, definitely big on breaking that up visually. Yeah.
So my newsletter is very design heavy, and I try to optimize for attention. And the way I do that is by breaking it up. I do 3 to 4 sentences at a time. I make sure that the margins are very centered to keep your eyes focused on the middle of your screen. I use colors that are not too bright, not too dull. Usually green, purple, blue, in like a middle tone. And then I use pictures after every block. And if I'm promoting content, I put that at the top, or I reference it and then I directly embed that content in there. So always breaking it up, but making it sort of like an experience. People on social media are just like scrolling and used to like blocks. So like I said, 3-4 sentences, just make it look good. Also make it so that it can be something that can be screenshotted and shared. Just something that's like visually pleasing, but also like that hits. I want to save that. I want to look at it later. I want to reference it. So just making it concise and digestible is above all the most important.
Do you ever tell people to screenshot?
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
Tell them
it
directly.
kind of just happens naturally, but my favorite thing is make sure to reply if something really hits.
We do the reply a lot.
Yeah, when someone replies, it's like, yo, like, this is like a message from space. Like, it's so great.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, when I see a repost, it's like, okay, this is
that's
definitely
smart.
working.
I'm ready to use that, yeah. Because I was also thinking about how a newsletter shows up on a desktop or laptop versus mobile, you know? Because we had some issues with that where like, we did so much layout and then it just looked janky.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, we got to go back in it. It's like, you know, so we had to think about something that like made every platform.
We got to work on both.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say if you're able to embed some of those TikTok videos in that newsletter as well, if you making it make sense, that would be helpful. One time I worked at CNN for CNN Snapchat, and we had to explain like ISIS or different things like that to 17-year-olds. That was our audience, and had the same challenge. Like, how do you make this make sense for that? I'm assuming as a teacher, as an educator, you're probably way more well-versed in that than we are. But never again shy away from speaking in a way that makes sense to your kids. Like, talk the way they talk the way you talk. Don't try to go out of your way to use too much news jargon. It feels like once you read it and you understand it, I always tell people, like, my mom will hit me up every day. Hey, Gavin, did you see this? Tell me about it. I'm like, okay, how do I explain this to Naomi Godfrey? And I do it, in that kind of way. I make sure I understand it first and try to give it to her in as little bit of detail as possible, kind of come up with the main bullet points. That tends to work. But yeah, if you got a TikTok going and that is resonating with folks, I think that's another good way. Just put that in the newsletter.
I think it's really smart too that your newsletter is something you can own. Like TikTok, that it can go away tomorrow. That one literally. So it's smart that you're giving your audience a home. I think that sounds like a great idea. And I would just remember to give your audience like a treat. We try to do that at Axios. Like, you don't want your whole newsletter to feel like broccoli. So if it's, although I do like broccoli, but you don't want it to all feel like vegetables. So if you're geared toward kids or younger people or people who aren't as tapped into news, maybe you focus your first couple stories in the newsletter on a hard news topic that you simplify. And then at the end, it's like, whatever's going on in pop culture or something fun, or like this new movie came out, whatever. Something that still fits your brand, but is just like, a little bit of a treat at the end.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a podcast as well, and I just make sure to name drop my newsletter. I mean, the podcast and the newsletter are the same name, and it's just really easy to be like, well, if you want to hear more about that, I write a newsletter too. Always link it in the description. If you're ever promoting the podcast itself on social media, also link to your newsletter. Just reference it. Just make it seem like they're the same cohesive product. And I mean, they are. So just make sure that everybody knows what you got going on, and don't be afraid to talk about it.
I really love podcasts, but their biggest shortcoming is they're not visual. So I would say, like, if you're talking about something in your podcast, hype up like the visual, like you can see it in my newsletter, or like you can experience more in my newsletter, or you can watch the video in my newsletter. And I feel like that's, as a podcast listener myself, sometimes I'm like, oh, I really wish I could see this thing. And that's how I've ended up following some of my podcasters on like Instagram, or like subscribing to their newsletters, because I was incentivized because I wanted to see this amazing thing they were talking about.
Yeah, I think one thing you could do is, like, there's always stuff on the cutting room floor, right? When you're doing a podcast, you can't fit it all in there. Is there a cool snippet or an interview clip that didn't make the podcast that you can tease? Like, hey guys, you want to hear more about this particular conversation? I'll play it in the newsletter. And on the newsletter, if you have shorter clips or things like that, if there's a topic that folks are interested on, you can plug back to the podcast. Like, okay, if you want to see this full story where this clip comes from, go back to my podcast now, right? Have them kind of play with each other that way.
Use Napkin AI. Everybody in here should know what Napkin AI is. Napkin.ai. So Napkin AI is a AI visualization tool that takes data and creates charts, creates visuals, creates these interactive mediums that make data look really cool. Fully customizable. You can change the colors. You can put text that doesn't have any numbers, and it will create something that makes data out of that. So if you have raw numbers in research, you're going to get something really good very quickly, and it's free. And for a newsletter, I use Napkin a lot to just help visualize some of the things that I'm talking about, because at the end of the day, it's about attention span and retention. So if you visualize really anything, especially data, it's tangible. And again, with the screenshots and the sharing, it's like, oh, this is really good. It speaks to me. I would just say do your own thing and don't worry about the noise. Just focus on what you're trying to do. If there's a lot of people there, that's great. They were saying podcasts are super saturated, like 2 years ago. And now, the revenue's going back up again. It's just trends. I mean, Substack is great. I really recommend it. It's not as customizable as some of the other mediums, but like Beehiiv, MailChimp are great too. But Substack is growing as a platform. And I think that's why you're noticing that, like, a lot of people are just jumping on. But that's the same thing with like Facebook and Twitter early on. And I think Substack has longevity because it has substance. You'll notice that if you just kind of scroll through it, but don't be discouraged by like these early movers. If you're sustainable and consistent, you'll be remembered for that. And people have a body of work to look back on because you started when you did.
Yeah, I would say, those other platforms, the MailChimps, the others, they have those built-in tools, bells and whistles that you can use if that's what you're going for. But Substack feels a little more straightforward. I have a old friend named Nick Valencia. He was a longtime correspondent for CNN, left CNN. He's independent now. He went straight to Substack because he's just straight going to stories. Here's the story. Here's everything you need to know. I imagine eventually I could see him gravitating to another one of these platforms to kind of build it out once his audience grows. But Substack made sense for him as somebody who was just like, I need to hit. He went out to LA, has been documenting ICE raids, that kind of thing. He was like, Substack is boom, like immediate for him. But yeah, I feel like if you're trying to engage and really build out a thing, maybe that's where some of those other platforms come in. But like Red said, go with what works for you. You know what you want to accomplish. And so whatever one of those makes the most sense for you is going to be the best one.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, and if there's room for all of those other Substackers, there's certainly room for you too. I think one thing that I've seen journalists do who go from a traditional newsroom to their own Substack, or if they're freelancing or whatever, and they kind of sound exactly like their former organization. And I think the most successful Substack journalists, or the ones that I find most interesting, are the ones that like infuse their personality, or the ones that write the stories and say the things that their past newsroom wouldn't let them do. So I just feel like kind of differentiating yourself from your organization, whether you're staying with it or not, is really useful, because it's like, I think you said LA Times. If your Substack looks just like the LA Times, why would I not just read the LA Times? You know, like find a way, staying in your beat, staying to what you're true to make that more interesting or make it more your personality. I think that incentivizes people.
So it is 7 minutes past 3, which means we are at time, and we just want to be mindful of everyone's in here. But thank you all so much for coming. We'll be around to take some more questions. Please scan the QR code on the screen for our contact information if you have any.